Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest of honor, Senior Minister and Coordinating Minister for Social Policies, Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. Thank you for joining us today for the launch of Beyond Storms and Stars, a memoir by Dr. Noeleen Heyzer. We would like to welcome our guest of honor, Senior Minister Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, Ambassador at Large Professor Tommy Koh, Chairman of SMU's Board of Trustees Mr. Ho Kwon Ping, Lee Kong Chian Distinguished Fellow Dr. Noeleen Heyzer, President of SMU Professor Lily Kong, and Dean of SMU School of Social Sciences, Professor Chandran Kukathas, for taking the time to be with us today. To start off this afternoon's program, we would like to invite Professor Lily Kong to deliver her welcome address. Professor Kong, please.
Guest of honor, Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, my apologies, Senior Minister and Coordinating Minister for Social Policies, Chairman SMU, Mr. Ho Kwon Ping, Professor Tommy Koh, Dr. Noeleen Heyzer, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to everyone. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to SMU today, and especially glad that we can have this small in-person event given the COVID conditions. As we were chatting outside, Chairman and me, we've probably not used this room for about 7 or 8 months for a gathering like this. So especially delighted that we could gather today. When Chairman Ho understood that Dr. Noeleen Heyzer was stepping off her UN roles a few years ago and returning to Singapore, he saw an opportunity for us to invite her to join the SMU family. I had the pleasure of lunching with Noeleen at Flutes at the National Museum. And we had a delightful conversation about how she could be such an inspiration for our students. She shared with me something of her life and work, and I was just mesmerized that afternoon. It was a totally absorbing conversation for me. And it became apparent to me that our students would have so much to learn from her, but that these stories that she was sharing were just too precious not to share them with a group beyond the students. And so as we chatted, the idea evolved that maybe Noeleen could put pen to paper and write a memoir for a far larger audience. As a Lee Kong Chian Distinguished Fellow at the School of Social Sciences, we were very happy to offer that little bit of support and assistance in the process of her penning her memoirs. I have thoroughly enjoyed the book. I have been especially inspired by the courage and tenacity she has displayed, her positive attitude and mindset, her determination to make a positive difference. In these COVID times and in a world of socioeconomic and political turmoils, what will see communities, societies, and nations through will be leaders and people with just these qualities. I've also enjoyed her book for the beautiful writing. The turns of phrases, the exactness of meaning captured. It was such a joy to read. It would be remiss of me not to say something of Noeleen's background. She did not have the opportunity to go to school until she was 8, and for those of you who haven't read the book, please do. But she studied hard, and her perseverance led her to obtain not just 1 degree, but 3. 2 in Singapore, and the last, a doctorate in social science from Cambridge University. She joined the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex in England in 1979, and later in 1982, she took on her first United Nations job at UNESCAP or the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific in Bangkok. The rest, as they say, is history, as she moved from one role to another, serving countries and regions as the Undersecretary General of the United Nations. Noeleen was also one of the she was the highest ranking Singaporean to serve in the UN from 2007 to 2015, as well as the first woman who served as the Executive Secretary of UNESCAP from 2007 to 2014. She was at the forefront of many pieces of important work, more important than the titles that she had and the positions that she held. She did important work that made a difference in so many areas: regional disaster preparedness, inclusive socioeconomic policies, sustainable agriculture and urbanization, energy security, regional connectivity, and so forth. I think the afternoon will be well spent in listening to others rather than to me, and so I shall stop. I know you will enjoy the discussions and hope that you might have some questions for her. I'd like to just end off by thanking Noeleen for bringing us this gift and congratulating her on writing this very inspiring and insightful memoir. We're very proud and honored to have your association at SMU. Thank you, Noeleen.
Thank you, Professor Tong. We would now like to invite our guest of honor, Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, to deliver his remarks. Senior Minister, please.
Dr. Noeleen Heyzer, Mr. Ho Kwon Ping, and all the distinguished guests who are here to celebrate Noeleen's book, her life, her accomplishments, and to take lessons from everything that she's been about. I think Noeleen is one of the most remarkable Singaporeans of her generation, and a beacon for women all over the world. She's quite simply one of the most remarkable and inspiring Singaporeans of her generation. So it's a real privilege for me to be here giving these opening remarks. Thank you for inviting me. I'll keep my remarks short because we're really here to listen to Noeleen and listen to Tommy and Lily and Chandran later. But I found it so inspiring reading Noeleen's own record of her life, what she has learned, what she has imparted. And I take a few lessons. First, as Lily was also mentioning briefly, one is struck by how Noeleen's early life was the crucible in which her moral imagination was shaped. And in her own words, she had an extraordinarily difficult life, as those of us who've read the book have learned, growing up in an impoverished household in Chinatown and without the permanence of family life. A very difficult childhood. But as she herself put it, growing up in such an environment, I became outraged at how people were made vulnerable and insecure by forces that were at times beyond their control. It was the birth of my social consciousness and empathy. But she goes on to say that out of this social landscape emerges another drama: people who refuse to be locked in their social conditions and history. I saw that the human spirit finds ways to transform the trajectory of vulnerability. I was determined to transform my life, urged by my belief in the power of people to shape their own lives and define their own destinies. And I think that's a very powerful lesson of how adversity can be overcome, shapes even more forceful convictions for oneself, but also in Noeleen's case, for others. The second lesson I take from Noeleen's story is that we can take advantage of the experience of being Singaporean and growing up in Singapore to do good for the world. Noeleen had a somewhat rocky start in her education, as Lily mentioned. Started school late, also had her school interrupted when she was a social welfare case at Mount Emily Girls' Home. Then, by chance, ended up, because of the intervention of her grandmother and Catholic father, a priest, ended up in an elite Catholic primary school where she was exposed to elitism, class arrogance, and inequality, but found her way finally to Katong Convent, which was a bit more accepting of diversity, then to St. Andrew's Secondary, where she became a top debater, excelled, developed her leadership skills, then on to Singapore University. But she benefited from a good education. And as she put it, the pathways to nationhood shaped by Singapore's leaders provided the ladders of social mobility for many, including my family. I benefited from a quality education, independent of gender and ethnicity. And that's a very fundamental part of the reality for those of us who grew up in Singapore. And in fact, her brother and her half-brother also benefited from quality investments in public housing and employment in the foreign MNCs that were investing in Singapore. So growing up in Singapore, being part of the Singapore experience gives us advantage, but it also gives us that ability to contribute to the world. And in contributing to the world, we also shape how the world views Singapore as a force for good. A very small country, but a force for good. And several of the others who are here today with us today have also exemplified that ability to use our Singaporeanness to do good for the world. And there are younger Singaporeans now who are following in Noeleen's footsteps, some in small ways, some not well known. There's a Singaporean doctor, Dr. Kang Hui Min, who left to work in Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, in South Sudan, just in February this year. There's a humanitarian worker, Wang Weihui, who's been based in Syria for the past 5 years. There'll be others, and there must be others. Young people motivated to use the advantages of being Singaporean and growing up in Singapore to do good for the world. So that's the second lesson that I take from Noeleen's life and experience. A third lesson is she tells us something quite important about leadership. That leadership is that ability to persuade and translate moral conviction into practical change, is that ability to translate moral convictions, which we must have as leaders, into practical change. And Noeleen's leadership experience in the United Nations in a range of capacities was always one that was in a setting that was fraught with complexity, turf wars, geopolitical tensions, and a shortage of resources, as we know, in the United Nations. A very difficult environment, extraordinarily difficult environment in which to operate, to lead, and to effect change. And throughout her career, you can see that ability to navigate a complex environment, not to be defeated by it, to persuade, to adjust, and to find a way in which, even against institutional obstacles, you manage to persuade people to move forward. Noeleen did it in UNIFEM, where she was the longest-serving executive director. There was a point in time when UNIFEM might have been dissolved. Very difficult time. And through your leadership and the adjustments you made, including very tough adjustments, the financial reforms that were necessary, you managed to restore UNIFEM to its place as the lead agency for women in the United Nations and in the world, and a knowledge leader in the UN system. And then again, Noeleen's role in the UN Security Council historic resolution in year 2000, October 2000, Security Council Resolution 1325, as they put it. A historic resolution because it was the beginning of the recognition of the role of women in peace and security. And that resolution came 1 week after Noeleen's impassioned speech to the Security Council. Not just impassioned, but the force of reality that she brought to the Supreme Council. As Noeleen herself says in her book, and this was part of her strategy of leadership, I learned that those who want to create change within a system as complex as the UN must engage leadership at multiple levels, linking realities on the ground to high levels of decision-making. And for change to last, it must be championed by leaders who come from within communities themselves. It cannot depend on the United Nations and member states alone. We must recognize, legitimize, and invest in leadership and agency for change at all levels on the basis of shared global values and responsibility. And that was Noeleen's method, spending time on the ground, listening to people, listening to women, and bringing that reality up through many different levels of decision-making. And you succeeded. And I think that's a very important lesson about what effective leadership is about. The fourth lesson I take from Noeleen's life is that idealism must never fade, and the task of translating ideals into a better reality never ends. And again, when you read Noeleen's book and we look at her life itself, she has moved from one challenge to another, but always infused with fresh and even more forceful idealism. And as she herself notes in her book, we now face new threats to human and global security. The rise of ethno-nationalism, spread of hate speech, divisive politics, racism, self-interests that threaten to weaken multilateral norms and institutions that promote tolerance, justice, and collective global interests. And I'm quoting here again from Noeleen with a little bit of trimming. It needs nothing less than a global social contract with a protection floor of fundamental rights, especially for people struggling against persecution and the violation of human dignity. Women must be at the center of this social contract. leading change, building effective coalitions, pressuring institutions, and creating a vision of a world free from violence and fear for everyone. And this is Noeleen, not the Noeleen of her early years, but Noeleen of her mature years, still infused with that desire to change the world for the better, as we all must be, as we all must be. Finally, I can't help saying that this book is also an ode to coconut oil. Who knows how different Noeleen would be, and how different UNIFEM and UNESCAP and the UN would be, had it not been for Anna Ong Chu Lien, her maternal grandmother, a person who didn't have the advantage of a formal education, and who, after Noeleen's mother's passing, finally managed to rescue Noeleen from a destructive father's home, had her back at home with her, and decided that the only way out for Noeleen, she didn't have much faith in marriage as a way out, the only way out for Noeleen as a young woman was through education and a strong brain. And a strong brain meant giving Noeleen good food for the brain. And we all read these different scientific accounts of what good foods are for the brain, but very importantly, bathing the head in coconut oil so that when you walk in the hot sun, your brain doesn't dry up, you see. And many of us would remember that this was quite common in those days. Actually, I didn't realize that the Chinese also used it, because the Indians, certainly the Tamils, used it all the time. And every time you get on a public bus, there'll be some odor in the bus, somewhere along the seats, which was coconut oil. And I would not want to rule this out as one of the explanations for Noeleen's very impressive life of leadership. So let me end there. Noeleen's an inspiration. We must learn from her life, and everyone must have that same moral conviction and the ability to translate moral convictions into practical reality step by step. Thank you very much, Noeleen.
Thank you, Senior Minister. May I invite Chairman Mr. Ho Kwon Ping on stage to present Senior Minister with a token of appreciation, please. As Dr. Noeleen had earlier gifted Senior Minister her book, Mr. Ho is presenting a book entitled Imaginations. A photo book by an SMU alumnus chronicles the growth and developments of SMU in its first 18 years as a university. Thank you, Senior Minister and Chairman. We will now like to invite today's panelists, Dr. Noeleen Heyzer, Professor Tommy Koh, Professor Lily Kong, Professor Chandran on stage to start the panel discussion. Panelists, please.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I am Chandran Kukathas, Dean of the School of Social Sciences here at SMU and the Lee Kong Chan Professor of Political Science. It's an honor to moderate this afternoon's discussion. Joining me on stage on my extreme right is Professor Lily Kong, SMU's 5th president, the first Singaporean to lead this 21-year-old university and the first woman to head a university in Singapore. Professor Kong is internationally renowned for her research on social and cultural change in Asian cities, and I'm sure, of course, well known to many of you here. Next to her is Professor Tommy Koh. He is an ambassador at large at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a professor of law at the National University of Singapore. He is director of Tembusu College and chairman of the governing board of the Center of International Law at the National University of Singapore. And of course, we have the author of this great book that we're celebrating today, Dr. Noeleen Heyzer. She is currently a member of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation and SMU's Lee Kong Chan Distinguished Fellow here at the School of Social Sciences. She was an Under-Secretary General of the UN from 2007 to 2015, and the first woman to serve as the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. I would like to make a few remarks before I hand over to our other panelists, but I'll confine myself to very little since time is pressing. But one thing I wanted to mention, if it's not already obvious to everyone, is that Noeleen does not stop. I had the pleasure of having lunch with her a few weeks ago to discuss the upcoming panel. And of course, she had to rush away because this was at the time when Afghanistan was in crisis, people were fleeing, and she was, of course, up late at night trying to help people who needed to be rescued from very, very dire circumstances. And I think this is the Noeleen who is the author of this book. And I think it's a book that all of us should read. Many people have already said this, and I do indeed encourage you to read it. I myself found the first parts of it most engaging because it was interesting to see the account of a young girl growing up in the early days of Singapore's life, and then the contrast between that and the interesting and accomplished woman I met was very, very striking indeed. So again, I encourage you all to read this book. I would like to say more about it, but as I said, I don't want to take up too much time. So let me turn first to Professor Lily Kong to offer some comments, and then I'll turn to Professor Tommy Koh.
Right. You've caught me off guard, Chandran, because I thought Prof. Koh was going to go first. Would you like to do that, Prof. Koh?
Please.
I guess age has precedence over beauty. I want to begin by saluting the inspiring chairman of SMU, Ho Kwon Peng, and his equally inspiring partner, Claire Chiang. Next, I want to pay my homage to our much loved and respected Senior Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam and his muse, Jane Itogi. I recently had the pleasure of welcoming Lily Kong to the Tembusu College, and I described her then as one of the national treasures of Singapore. So I will not embarrass her today by repeating my praise. I was hoping there may be many SMU students here, but I guess because of COVID-19, they can't join us. But I have a request, Lily. Could you please put my short remarks on your website? Because I scripted them for the benefit of the student. I wanted to share with your students 5 lessons they can learn from Noeleen's life and career. Yeah? So 5 short lessons. Lesson number 1. The first lesson is that no matter how adverse your circumstances, and no matter how bleak the future may appear to be, don't give up. Don't give up. Be strong and endure your hardship. Things will get better. In Noeleen's case, as Tharman said, things got better for Noeleen when her maternal grandmother obtained her custody, took her away from the welfare home, and brought her to stay with her, with Uncle Paul and Auntie Anne. That changed Noeleen's life. Lesson number 2. The second lesson is that when you're confronted with 2 options, the hard option and the soft option, resist the temptation to go for the soft option. When Noeleen arrived in New York to become the executive director of UNIFEM, she found that the organization was in debt. The head of UNDP, a mutual friend of ours, made her a tempting offer. In exchange for the grant of $10 million a year, UNIFEM will be absorbed into the UNDP. Noeleen rejected this offer because she wanted UNIFEM to be independent. She worked very hard. And the end of her tenure, the annual budget of UNIFEM was over $150 million US. Lesson number 3. Lesson number 3 is not to be a status quo leader. It's easy to be a status quo leader. Noeleen was a visionary leader. When she arrived at the UN, gender equity or equal rights for women was a niche issue. Because of UNIFEM's good work, gender equality became a mainstream issue at the UN. And violence against women became an international issue. The fourth lesson is that you can be a change maker. Since time immemorial, the soldiers of victorious army think they have the right to rape the women of the defeated enemy. And this happened in Rwanda, this happened in the Balkans. Noeleen had to move the mountains in order to persuade the UN Security Council to declare in the resolution Tharman has referred to that the raping of women in an armed conflict is a war crime. Lesson number 5. The fifth and final lesson is for the female students of SMU. And I speak directly to them. You still live in a world that's dominated by men. However, you must not allow men or society in general to brainwash you into believing that you are not as good as men. Step forward, speak up, accept leadership when opportunity knocks on your door. Fight against prejudice and discrimination. Break every glass ceiling which impedes the rise of women to the top. Lily Kong and Noeleen Heyzer are two role models for you. Thank you.
Lily, can I turn the floor to you?
Very happy to take on from here. I thank Prof. Koh for his very kind words. I will keep my remarks short as well because I really would like to hear from Noeleen and to make this a little bit more of a dialogic session. Prof. Koh talked about 5 lessons for SMU students. You can be assured that we'll make sure the students get access to this. I would also like to add just 3, both equally applicable to our students, but also perhaps our faculty. The first takes off from the words of Sir Richard Jolly, who was the influential executive director of the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex from 1972 to 1981. And I'm going to quote from the foreword of his book. Forward to Noeleen's book, I beg your pardon. And I quote, "Academics can learn a lot from her struggles to make research count. For instance, by mobilizing victims to explain their situations and lead the actions required for change. Noeleen's research into deforestation in the Limbang region of Sarawak is especially revealing. The state government had put the blame on shifting cultivation rather than on those involved in logging or cutting the forests to make way for oil palm plantations. Noeleen's research not only revealed the truth, but also identified a way forward, which mobilized political support by moving to a situation of joint land titles where women, as well as men, could own land. unquote. Why that spoke to me so powerfully was as follows. As academics and as students involved in research, how do we make our research count? And I invite ourselves to reflect on this in an educational institution like this. The second and third lessons take off from Noeleen's own words, beautifully penned in her preface. She wrote, I quote, "Each of us must forge our own path as a solitary stream in the landscape of our history before we come together as a confluence that opens to a powerful sea." These words obviously resonate with me given the geographical metaphors. But a lesson that we take away from this, or at least I took away from this, and all the evidence base that is fleshed out in the book, is that we each must figure out our own ikigai, our own reason for existence, our reason for being. And when we then learn to work together with other like-minded people, the impact can be so very powerful. The third lesson for me stems from that same quote which I've read you, and there are many, many gems like that in the book. At every juncture, I came across a sentence, a paragraph that just spoke to me and opened up vistas and inspiration. But let me just finish off with this third lesson for me, and hopefully also for our students and perhaps even some of our faculty. And that is the power of the pen. It is my lament that with social media communications, short messaging, presentation software, like PowerPoint, Google Slides, Canva, and what have you, that many are losing the ability to write persuasively, evocatively, yet simply. Noeleen's book, if you have a chance to read it, and I urge you to do so, is full of beautiful phrases, nuanced meaning that really captures, I think, the experience that you've had and conveys it very powerfully. Let us not lose sight of the beauty of language and the power of the word. Thank you.
Noeleen, may I invite you to offer some remarks of your own?
Well, I didn't prepare any statement to make, but I just first of all, want to say that I'm in the company of my mentors and of friends who have accompanied me on this journey and has made it really possible. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of you first. And Senior Minister Tharman, thank you so much. In all your busyness, how did you find the time to read? and to actually extract some of the really deep meaning. But I love the coconut oil because I think we all have to laugh, and to learn how to laugh in seriousness, because I think that that's what keeps me going. So thank you very much, Senior Minister. Jane, what can I say but thank you for being here. Huang Pin, I know you are the chairman, but you're also my dear friend, together with Claire. And I must have to tell you that when I was in Sussex, they both came, and Claire took some of the most amazing pictures of me and my twin daughters, who unfortunately could not be here. Kani, what can I say but thank you? So there's just so many wonderful people that I just have to say a big, big, big thank you to. Because without friendship, without that kind of solidarity, without that, that basically a deep sense of what is possible in human interaction, you're not going to keep the type of idealism that we need to have in order to go forward. So basically, that is the one message which I would like to share. But most of all, Prof. Ko, you are beyond words. So I just have to say thank you, but that's not enough. Lily, that lunch was quite something, but you're too special, but I have to say that when Lily asked me to write, I started writing, capturing the experiences, but more from the perspective of a UN person who was a bit disappointed of not being able to do more because of bureaucracies or whatever, But then when I shared it over lunch with my daughters, they actually told me, please don't write for the UN. They don't need it. Could you write for our generation and put it in a language that will make us excited? And can you tell a story, and don't be so afraid to share your own struggle. Why is it other people have to struggle and not you? So why don't you share it? And then it has more power. So that's how the birthing of the book came about. It was never supposed to be a memoir. Chandran, thank you so much for moderating this and having me as basically a fellow of the School of Social Sciences. But I just want to say, many people ask me about the title of the book, right? They understand Beyond the Storms. I mean, that don't need any explanations. But why Beyond the Stars? And so I thought maybe I should just talk a little bit about why Beyond the Stars. And the best way of capturing that, the meaning of that, is actually in the words of a 17th century English poet, Edward Young. And he said, "Too low they build, who build beneath the stars." And there are times in our lives, not just individual lives, but also lives of our countries, life as our human species, life as a global community, where if we were to repair the past, not to build back better, or not to build back the status quo, but to really create a new imagination and a really new making for the next generation, we need to build beyond the stars. And there are pivotal moments when that happened. So let me invite you to cast your mind back to what inspired me. And that was 75 years ago, when the world, our grandmothers, your grandmothers, that generation that recovered from the Second World War, they saw what human beings can do to one another, and they saw the devastation of what can be and the impact of that on everybody's lives, right? So it needed a transformation that was so deep, And that imagination by the leaders of that time was just far too fantastic for me to even imagine. They came together as a collective. It was not just the individual, but it was a collective reimagination of what the world can be. And they went for the ground rules of what a global community can be if we were to sustain peace and security. There were 4 big ideas that came out of it that inspired me. First is that don't go for your guns as a way of solving problems when there's conflict. There will always be grievances. The military solution should be the last resort. Can we try to negotiate? Can peace and security start with mediation? So the whole thing about peace and security, how do we build the infrastructure for peace and security? It's not just the words, it's the building of that peace, the foundation and the infrastructure for peace and security. And what are they? What are they? Firstly, development. And this is where I think the experience of Singapore was just so wonderful. And thank you, Senior Minister, for raising that. Because I think I would have been a very different person with that early experience if I was not in Singapore. So the fact that I was in Singapore made a big difference. And what was it? Singapore was a developmental state. And people believed that we need to progress by investing in our economic and social future. And that economic progress and social progress should be the foundation of which we build a social ladder for the next generation. So development. The other one was the right of people and countries, we the peoples, that was in the charter, that we the peoples should have the power of independence to shape our own destiny and the freedom to shape our own destiny. And this was where the idea of sovereignty came in, that because we were coming out of colonialism, of the age of empire, so it was really a prevention of unduly interference in the future of people, right, and the birth of nation states. So in a sense, because we were not nation states before, because if we go back 200 years, we were part of an empire. If we go back 700 years, which Singapore did, we were also a part of somebody else's empire. But the creation of nation states basically involved taking our future into our own hands. And Asia did not have an easy future. Because if you listened, and it came out in part of my book, Gunnar Myrdal, he basically said in his Asian drama, the drama of Asia is one of poverty and deprivation. And he said, however, the drama is still unfolding. And history is in the power of man to shape. And of course, I disagree to him, because it is, I quickly say, it's men and women. And this is how, because if you look at the poverty and deprivation, I mean, they all have a woman's face, and therefore you need, but here's somebody whom I truly admire, but at the same time, I think it captures it. But if you look at that and where we are today, rising Asia, once upon a time, was a very different place. And what Gunnar Myrdal did was to remind us of where we were. It was an Asia in crisis. But we actually captured that moment, that pivotal moment, using the ground rules that were created in the multilateral system, using basically the opportunities of the globalizing economy and the solidarity and the trust that it will work to rebuild our countries, our future. Of course, it was not an easy task. I think the final thing, the fourth idea, is the individual. While we talk about all the collective, don't forget the individual persons. And here, the emphasis on the rights and the dignity of the individual to live in larger freedom, free from want and free from fear. Because at the end of the day, we are all made individuals and collective. And somehow we have to find a way in which the agency and the empowerment of the individual could contribute to the common purpose and to the common good. So let me just stop there.
Thank you very much, Noeleen. I think we have a little bit of time for some questions. So let me turn it to the audience. If anyone would like to raise a question to any members of the panel, but to Noeleen in particular, please raise your hand and be recognized. Please say who you are and where you're from. If there's a...
I'm Simon Tse, Noeleen Heyzer admirer. Could I ask perhaps a silly question? If there was a young Noeleen Heyzer somewhere in Singapore, do you think she needs to go out to grow and do as much as you did? Could she use the new Singapore, this current Singapore, as a kind of fulcrum for change?
A very interesting question, Simon. I think the present-day Singapore, I wouldn't have to leave to come my way. I think it is just amazing what has happened. But I think in the earlier days of Singapore's history, Singapore was struggling. It wasn't an easy place. It was in a sea of instability, and there was the Cold War. There were ideological divides. It was very difficult to navigate. And then the countries were finding ways of creating national identity, trying to create common purpose from a whole diversity. The point is, I should start by saying all of our parents and grandparents were migrants. And they came from different parts of Asia, each with very different experiences. And the amount of diversity that had to be dealt with to create a national identity was a big struggle. And therefore, I mean, many of the issues that I was struggling with and so on, they were important, but they were not high up on the political agenda. So I think that today the issues are very different. And I am just amazed at especially the role of the universities to encourage young people to be innovative, the exchanges you have. It's just unbelievable, the amount of opportunities that are here. So I just want to say you're looking at two different time and points, and the evolution that has taken place is something that we should really appreciate.
What's your short answer to Simon? Yes or no?
Yes, I would be able to stay back and find a place.
I think we have time for one more question.
No, I think Anne wanted.
Hi, Noeleen. Congratulations again for a beautifully written memoir. Noeleen and I spent some time in Yusof College. We were on campus at the time when Singapore was beginning to emerge into an independent nation, 1965 onwards. But I had a question about sense of purpose, the purpose in life. You had a very strong sense of purpose even as an undergraduate. And later on, I felt that you had a very strong sense of partnerships, having partners, building partnerships to achieve whatever you thought was in your vision at that time. It was very commendable. But Alma, all my love always, what impact did you think have on you and your future trajectory?
Thank you very much, Anne. Anne and I go back a long way. She was actually my maid of honor at my wedding, right? So we share a lot of secrets together and some of life's knocks together as well. So Anne is very special to me. And I must say, actually Janadas is also here. And he still calls me Auntie Noeleen. Please don't stop. but his mom was a witness to my wedding. So I just want to say that. Yeah, her question is the impact of the word amla, which is what Yu Ting wrote on me and our kind of relationship. I just would like to say that you're absolutely right, because I realized in my life's journey that you are never alone, and that there is a community of support that you need to be able to identify and build. Until today, I mean, everything that I think I've achieved has been done through the individual effort, but also through the collective support. And I just want people to really get that sense, you know, because sometimes you can be so pessimistic that, oh, the world is so whatever. But there are so many, I mean, difficult as it is, there are very many good people who want to do and contribute to the global good and to the common good. And we need to find that. So coming to your term, obviously, Yu Ting had a very strong influence on me. He was extremely idealistic, sometimes not practical. So I was the practical one. so I think, Tommy, you mentioned something about me, which I thought was very interesting. Because the thing is that, and I think the senior minister also mentioned it, I think you need to have moral courage, moral imagination, but we are existing in the real world. And the real world requires, I mean, if we are going to turn all that, our ideals into real change, and not for ourselves, because we can do it for ourselves, but for the larger community and for the larger pathway for other people. I mean, it's complicated. It's extremely complicated. You have to be strategic. You have to be strong. You have to be patient. You have to realize that power is not a zero-sum game. You have to understand a lot of complexities. But it's not something that you learn immediately. Actually, you learn in the doing. I'm talking about lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is not just from books. It's actually from experimenting what works and what doesn't work in order to create the change that you need. And I think today's world, we have to basically find how to build alliances across sectors. Very complicated, because people share different interests and different values and so on, to find a solution that is so critical if we want to shape a future. And actually, before I know we are coming to the end, and I just want to say, actually, we are in the week that just started the new UN General Assembly. And on Tuesday, the Secretary General will be delivering a big discussion among all the heads of states and so on our common agenda. And the way I would really recommend people to kind of read it, because he captures very deeply the need for cross-sectorial solutions to many of the world's major, really, really major challenges that we can only do together. So I think it is a real challenge to try to work individually, to use your idealism, and that has to go on, because without idealism, I don't think life is worth it. But at the same time, if you want to convert that into reality, you need to find ways of doing it, given the right environment and understanding also the right context in which you are engaged with. So I think that that is the answer, but of course, AMLA will always live with me. Well, people are asking, what is AMLA? AMLA is all my love, always. I think without love, it would be also very terrible to have life. So I would suggest that, it's just idealism and love, if I may say that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Noeleen. I think that's a very good note on which to end. Unfortunately, in the real world, people have schedules and our time is up. But let me thank all the panelists and Noeleen for being here, and Senior Minister Tharman for coming and presenting here, and our other distinguished guests. I think we have time now for a photo, but afterwards there will be a book signing outside, so if any of you have not had a chance to purchase the book and meet with Noeleen, please take that opportunity. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And
thank you, panelists, for your engaging discussion. May I invite Professor Kong to present a token of appreciation to Professor Tommy Koh, please. And now we would like to invite Professor Kong to present a token of appreciation to Dr. Noeleen Heyzer, please. Thank you, Professor Kong. May I request that the panelists stay on stage for photo taking, please. We would like to invite Mr. and Mrs. Tharman, Mr. Ho and Ms. Chang on stage for a group photo, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the launch of Beyond Storms and Stars. A big thank you to our distinguished speakers and guests for being with us this evening.